Hello. The title of this consecutive speech is Sunspots and Climate. I'm going to start my speech now. Ladies and gentlemen, in my younger days, I was a CB radio enthusiast. CB is Citizens Band, of course, and I was also interested in shortwave radio, which is pretty similar in some ways. Now, my interest in CB radio and shortwave radio allowed me to gain snippets of information about, among other things, the sun, and in particular, the solar cycle. I want to talk for a few minutes about the solar cycle and describe its consequences for our lives on Earth. It's all about solar activity. Now, solar activity usually manifests itself as the number of sunspots on the surface of the sun. And this activity occurs in a cycle which lasts about 11 years. So you move from a maximum number of sunspots to a minimum number of sunspots and back to a maximum. That cycle takes about 11 years. The last minimum was about 2006, 2007. The most recent maximum was probably around the end of 2013. Now, the problem with this most recent maximum is that astronomers have found very little activity on the surface of the sun. There are not nearly as many sunspots as usual. In other words, the sun is just not producing the goods. Let me just say a few words about sunspots. Sunspots, as you may know, are darker areas on the surface of the sun. Some of them are as big as the Earth. They usually last a few days, and in fact, they are cooler than the surrounding parts of the sun. Sunspots are about 4,000 degrees Celsius compared to the rest of the surface of the sun, which is at a temperature of about 5,500 degrees Celsius. In fact, sunspots are an indication of a certain amount of disturbance in the sun's magnetic field. Now, as I said, they seem to be somewhat of an endangered species recently because the cycle hasn't really got off the ground. Some people feel that the rhythm of the 11-year cycle is becoming unhitched, and there is other evidence to support this. At this point, you may ask, so what? I mean, what interest is that to me, what happens on the surface of the sun? Well, solar activity does affect our activities here on Earth. First of all, a high level of solar activity improves the propagation of radio waves over long distances. It improves the way shortwave radio can communicate, and the same applies to Citizens Band radio, so that's good news for radio enthusiasts. But that's not the main point. The fact is that the sun's activity also affects the climate. Now here there's been a lot of speculation, but a certain number of facts have been established. It appears, for example, that a low level of sunspot activity has a significant cooling effect on the Earth's climate. And there is a historical precedent for this, and that's what's known as the Maunder minimum. Now, the Maunder minimum is in fact a period of time, ranging from about 1645 to 1715, so a long time ago. During this period, there was almost no sunspot activity, so the cycle was more or less flat. And especially in Europe, the result was very long winters and very cool summers. So, does that mean that with the flattening off of the solar cycle, we're looking at the end of climate change or global warming? Well, scientists wouldn't go this far. They tend to remain rather coy. They point out, first of all, that it's not really possible to predict how long this solar anemia, if you like, might last. It might last for a couple of cycles. It could last for 100 years or more. Nobody really knows. But I think for the environmental alarmists in any case, a longer period of solar inactivity could only be good news in that it might at least help to offset some of the expected global warming. And of course, for shortwave radio enthusiasts and for CB radio enthusiasts, in other words, the few that remain, because in these days of omnipresent internet and satellite communication, there are very few shortwave radio listeners left anymore. Obviously for those it's quite bad news, because it means that for them the airwaves may be faced with a somewhat longer period of silence. Thank you.